Hello again, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's go. What's the scariest paranormal experience you've ever had or heard from someone who you believe wouldn't lie? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in front of the house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling him from inside the house. The thing is, my grandmother passed away a few years before that, but he told me that the voice was so pressing that he actually got up to look inside the house, and as soon as he got inside, he heard a loud crash behind him and turned around to see that the chair he had been sitting in moments ago had been crushed by the cast iron gutter that fell on it. If he didn't come inside the house, he would have probably been seriously injured. I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but every time I think about it, it sends chills down my spine. So I was in 5th or 6th grade hanging out with a friend at his parents' new house that just finished building. We are in his family-attached 3-car garage looking through boxes from his room in his old house, though I can't recall what we were looking for when he turns to me and says, "Want to see something crazy?" He goes and takes a tennis ball from one of those clear tubes they come in and proceeds to give it a couple of tries before successfully throwing it through the crawl space door that leads to a storage space above the garage we're in. I clearly hear it bounce around and stop. I don't think anything about it, and we continue looking through the boxes in his garage. We're talking to each other when all of a sudden a tennis ball comes effing flying through the air and smacks the back wall of the garage right between us as we were standing over a box. We both bolted from his garage and went to his room on the other end of the house. He later explained to me that at their old house, located across the street from the recently built new house we're in, had a ghost in the attic that liked to move things around, as in keep things tidy. He said in the past that you could hear the boxes being slowly slid on the floor, ceiling above you, or that you would place something in one place and check on it later, and it was in a completely different place in the attic. He believed that the ghost followed them to their new home. All I know is the tennis ball experience freaked the hell out of me, and I refused to ever go back into their garage. Some facts. He was the youngest of 2 siblings, and his older brother was away at college. His dad was at work, and his mom had left us alone to go to the store. There was no one else at the house. Even if there was someone in that crawl space above the garage, you would have easily heard them walking around. I may be late, but I'll share anyways. I haven't told this to anyone yet. This happened maybe 2 years ago. I was asleep taking a nap in the living room when I woke up to my dad saying, "Watch out for your mom." So I got up, went to look for my mom, and found her passed out in the bathroom. She had really high blood pressure, to the point where internal organs were in danger. We could get help fast enough, so things could be settled with medication only. If my dad wouldn't have woken me up, things could have ended worse. He died 5 years prior to that event from leukemia. According to my mother, my sister once went to her afraid of someone in her room, then gave a good physical description of my mother's father, who'd been dead long before either of us were born. My sister had no reason to know what he looked like, not just because he was long dead, but because he was never in any of our family photos, because my mother hated him, because he was a pedophile. My dad once told me a story about one of his cousins. The cousin used to live with his family, wife and daughter, in an apartment building. On the floor above them lived an old widowed woman whose young son, around 24 to 25, served in the Indian Army and had died during a bomb attack somewhere in North India. A few weeks after the funeral, my uncle started having dreams about the son who had died. He would tell my dad and his mom that the son keeps knocking on his door in the dream and just stands there once the door is opened. He had the same dream for 2 weeks straight until one night before dinner, he opened his front door to go down to the lobby and saw the son standing in front of him. He quickly shut the door, freaked out for a few minutes behind the door, and opened it again to find the son still standing there. I'm not sure what happened right after, but my uncle then started seeing the son inside his apartment, and then it just stopped. He didn't see the son anymore. Maybe it actually happened, or It was the psychological aftermath of overthinking about a death. It creeped me out regardless. It could be psychological. It could be some type of coping mechanism or just hearing something and it comes through a dream, but it happened, so. My nephew lives with me in an old farmhouse built in the 1840s. When he was about 4, maybe 5, he told me that there was a little boy named Charlie who lived in our house. He said Charlie had never heard of video games and that Charlie's dad left him home all by himself. This was around the same time that he had an imaginary friend named Mr. Cat, who was an anthropomorphic cat, so I wrote it off. A couple weeks later, I was shaving with the bathroom door open and thought I could see my nephew kind of looking in at me out of the corner of my eye. I stuck my head around and could see him from behind, messing with an old china cabinet we keep important stuff in, and just as I walked into the room, I could see my nephew sitting in the living room watching TV. He couldn't have crossed that much distance that fast or silently. I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was Charlie." He says there's a really super book in there from when you were a little boy, and at the bottom of a stack of old documents and stuff in the china cabinet is a book I got as a gift when I was a kid. I didn't even know it was there. It was under 2 boxes of documents and couldn't been seen until the boxes were lifted out. The little boy didn't look like you think of ghosts. He wasn't transparent, he didn't float, he didn't look spooky, he just looked like a kid. Now I'm convinced that people see ghosts for whatever they are every day and don't realize it because they look just as real as we do. Edit. I haven't been able to find any information on people who lived here in the past. My grandparents bought the home in 1967. I asked my grandmother about it, and she said she wasn't surprised I saw Charlie in the bathroom at all because I was little. I played with a little boy I said whose name was Homer, and Homer would unroll all the toilet paper when nobody was home. I've never seen her, but there's also a woman ghost who appears to be in her mid-20s with long brown hair. I have no idea why I've never seen her, but a couple other family members, some friends of the family, and several members of the work crew that remodeled our home saw her a couple of years ago. When I was 17, I went to my mate's house for some beers for his birthday. I probably only had about 5 drinks. Come the early hours of morning, probably around 2 to 3 a.m., I head out to the kitchen for a drink. I pour a drink of water and turn around and take a sip, and as I'm swallowing, I swear I hear footsteps. The ground in the entire room is all made up of tiles, so I hold my drink down and listened for a few seconds. Next thing I know, I hear fast footsteps in front of me, running towards me. And suddenly, a huge cold breeze blew right through me. At that point, I just freaked out and ran back to the bedroom. I ended up waking my friend up and telling him what happened, and we listened and could hear odd bangs and bumps from out there, but nothing out of the ordinary after that never happened. I'll still always remember it though. Gives me goosebumps writing this. One night when I was maybe 10 to 12, I had trouble falling asleep. My bedroom was the entire top floor of our house, with my bed and such being on the left side and storage closets and a play area being on the right. I was lying in bed when I heard a noise from the other side of the room and seeing a rocking horse begin to rock. It was sitting just outside one of those storage closet doors. It proceeded to rock its way halfway across the room and stop dead under the ceiling light. At this point, I was freaking out and just buried my head under the blankets and never peeked out again until morning. It was all confirmed to not be a dream, as the rocking horse was still in the middle of my room when I woke up. Furthermore, I got a stern reprimand from my parents for being up out of bed playing with my toys well past my bedtime. Their bedroom was directly below the storage closet play area and had headed the creaking of the rocking horse shuffling across the room. As you were describing your room, it reminded me of my boyhood room, so pretty cool. I didn't have a rocking horse though, or a ghost, I think. My mom and I lived with my grandma at her house for a while, after my grandpa passed away from the effects of a major stroke. At 14 years old, I woke up really early on Christmas Day after he'd passed. It was barely light outside. Under the tree, among the wrapped presents while still half awake, I could make out a new winter coat and hat laid out by my mom. Then someone standing in the hallway in the doorway, leading from the living room to the hall, said to me, "Go back to bed. It's too early." Instead of going through the doorway, I took an alternate route upstairs to my mom. All other bedroom doors were closed. Later in the morning, when everyone was up and about, my grandma said her alarm clock radio went off. She hadn't set that thing in forever. She only used it for the clock. During breakfast, I told her the above story to my mom and grandpa. Mom then looked at grandma with wide eyes. All they could both say was, "Well, it wasn't me, I was asleep." Not scary, but it's all I have. My parents were on their honeymoon to Key West. When they arrived at the hotel to check in, they were told that the room would be non-smoking. With my dad being a smoker, they requested a different room. They got the room switch and went to their room. As they got off the elevator, the smell of fresh paint was overwhelming. Down the hall, there was a painter with all necessary supplies laid out around him and was painting the wall. As my parents walked past him, they casually greeted him, and the painter had absolutely no acknowledgement of their presence. Whatever. When they got to their room, the smell of paint was even worse in there. So bad it wasn't even bearable, so they decided to go to the front desk to change rooms. When they explained the situation, the attendant looked very confused and informed them that there wasn't a scheduled paint job on that floor for that day, but agreed to change their room. My parents go back to their floor to grab their luggage, and the painter is completely gone. All supplies cleaned up and gone within 10 minutes after the smell of paint was completely gone. At this point, my parents were freaked out but didn't think much of it and go to their new room. The next morning, on their way to breakfast, they overhear a tour guide talking to a group. My parents turned in when the guide mentioned the floor that they were originally supposed to stay on. Apparently, a long time ago, there was a painter on that floor painting and fell down the elevator shaft to his death. Now, parents don't normally believe in the paranormal, but after an event like this, that they had no explanation for, it freaked them out a good bit. This one isn't necessarily scary, but definitely paranormal. I was 14 and sitting by myself in my living room playing some Halo when I noticed that the room around me seemed oddly quiet. I paused the game and tried to listen for the difference. It was strange. My house is over 100 years old, and usually there's an odd creak audible from somewhere nearby. Not now, though. It was dead quiet. I felt strange, but not threatened. There was nothing sinister about the silence. I sat for a few more minutes, just listening. It almost felt peaceful, actually. Then suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder, very lightly and briefly. But even today, I still remember the distinct feeling of a hand on my shoulder. It didn't scare me, nor did I jump up in surprise. I actually felt a familiar presence, like family. I mentioned the experience to my mom, and she told me she'd experienced the same thing, only one room over. She says she felt her father's presence with the hand. Pretty cool. TL, DR, ghost of my grandfather, watched me play some Halo. Before I was born, my father and mother had a small apartment together. My mother told me once she went in the basement and saw a woman standing at the base of the steps, just staring up at her, and then she vanished. Then, my father was in the shower, one with the sliding glass door that you can barely make out what's on the other side, when a large figure walked up to the other side of the glass and banged on it, making it blow out. My mother found him in the fetal position in the shower, covered in glass, and no one was around. That last one made the move out. He confirmed it happened, but doesn't like to talk about it. He's a relatively tough dude, so for something to scare him that much means a lot. Somewhere in between those two occurrences, they came home to find absolutely everything moved over about by an inch. They realized this caused they're not very good at dusting. Little late to the party, but here it goes. This was about 10 years ago, but still gives me chills just thinking about it. My now ex-wife and I had just gotten married and moved into a new neighborhood. We moved in the winter, As spring came, we noticed that there were multiple dead animals, bird, squirrels, raccoon, in the yard. We cleaned them all up and started to do improvements to the outside of the house and painting on the inside. I started to notice strange things going on. Keys not where I left them, small stuff like that. I thought it was just being forgetful. Then things slowly started to escalate. While in bed, I could swear I could hear a barely audible conversation, like a radio in a far room. As soon as I would try to focus on it, it would go away. I started to hear footsteps at the other end of the house. One night, while laying in bed, I hear a huge crash. Woke me up out of a dead sleep. I went into the kitchen and saw my kid's hamster cage on the floor about 15 feet from where it was. We would put it on the fridge at night because we had a cat and didn't want it getting to it. Now, I know what you're thinking. Cat knocked it off. But the cage had to fly over a breakfast bar and a kitchen table to get to its resting place. Then things got ugly. I would be sitting at home watching TV, and I would have this uncontrollable thought. What would it be like to be possessed? Or, I want to be possessed. I couldn't get this thought out of my head, couldn't concentrate on anything but that. I would literally have to say in my head, I love God, I love Jesus, over and over to get off the original thought. I need to add that I am not a religious person. As soon as I would leave the house, I would be fine, not one thought. But as soon as I pulled in my driveway, it would start up again, uncontrollable. I thought I was going crazy. I sat down with my wife and looked her dead in the eyes and said, I think I'm going crazy. I've been having weird thoughts. She turned white, and before I could say any more, she said that you want to be possessed. Come to find out, for the past month, she had been having the exact same thoughts. Then we started to compare stories. She told me that she was laying in bed without me. I worked seconds at the time, and she could hear a man whispering through the baby monitor while our child was fussing. Needless to say, we moved out within a month, ate the deposit. Her oldest daughter was still in school, and we had moved across town. I had to pick her up at their house on my days off when she got dropped off by the bus. As soon as I turned the corner, I would get those thoughts. I would sit in my car in the driveway and not even go inside and wait. TLDR, I think something tried to possess me. Noped the F out. Yeah, little possession story here in the house that you both shared. Okay, if you both felt it and you didn't share those stories before, might be something there. You should check with the people who live there now, if you can. Not scary, just funny. My family sails on the Great Lakes. A local author wrote 2 books called Haunted Lakes 1 and 2. The second book came out when I was 10 to 12. It detailed a spooky story of a cloudy day where a local guide was leading one visitor through an island lighthouse. It was a cloudy, crappy day. The visitors stopped and asked the guide whether he had his kids with him on the island. Guide said no. As far as he knows, there's no kids on the island. Visitor is puzzled, since he can hear distant cries of mutter, mother, and kids playing. Author of book assumes haunted because many of the old keepers were from Germany. But I've always had a strong suspicion that those two just heard my brother and I, probably about 4 to 6 at the time. My family tended to go out to the islands on our sailboat even when the weather wasn't great, and we would play outside as long as it wasn't pouring rain or storming. We also grew up speaking German, since my mom taught German at a school, and we were quite loud. Finally, we had a small craft, and knew all the anchorages. If we had been on the island, no one might have seen us, so I think it got written off in the book as a ghost. TLDR, an author of Hauntings on the Great Lakes, wrote about a haunted lighthouse, but I'm pretty sure the kids playing noises that he assumed were from the old German lightkeepers were my German-speaking brother and I.